Hey guys, Colin from Gaming Through the Ages here. Tales of Arise has finally come out. I got a chance to play through it. I put 70 hours into it. I wanted to come here and share my thoughts on the game because I'm a pretty big fan of the series, and a lot of people have been saying that this is the best Tales game to come out. Other people have taken a more moderate stance. Where do I stand? Let's get into it.
First, let's start with the world they've built here. We live on the world of Dana, which had been conquered by the Renans around 300 years ago. They divided Dana into 5 different realms and rule over the people by the blunt use of force. While there are more Danans than there are Renans, the Renans have a much more advanced technology, and the Danans' long-term oppression has sapped their will to fight. Or has it? We quickly learn that there is a rebellion brewing in Calaglia, the province where the main character, Alphen, has been enslaved. In the process of meeting them, we also find a Renan who has been held prisoner by the Renans, a woman named Shion. Alphen takes the opportunity to escape his slave camp where he's been for the past year, and teams up with Shion and the Crimson Crows to take the fight to the Renans. That's the premise for the story, and I want to get a bit deeper into the themes that the story addresses. But first, I want to talk a bit more about the characters. Alphen is our main character. He is a little bit of a stereotypical hero, always looking out for others, neglecting himself, you know the drill. In the beginning, he's wrapped up in a mystery, as he wears a mask that seems to both keep him from accessing his memories, and it stops him from feeling pain. As more of his mask breaks off throughout the course of the game, you find out more about Alphen's past, a past which is at the heart of the plot of the game. I like Alphen, but I think there have been better Tales of protagonists. Shion is also filled with mystery. She possesses an ability, more of a curse, called Thorns. If she is touched by anyone, or if she has bouts of strong emotions, then a ton of energy comes out of her that look like thorns, which will hurt anyone they come into contact with. She's a Renan, but she is also an outcast, and her initial goal is to kill all of the lords on Dana. She comes across as standoffish and detached, but as the game progresses, she begins to open up more and more. She also has a penchant for fashion and for eating vast amounts of food, something that makes her character feel more like an individual rather than an archetype. Both Alphen and Shion have contrasting traits. You can see how the two abilities complement each other. Shion hurts anyone who touches her, but Alphen can't feel any pain, so he's the only one who can touch her. This extends to another key pairing. Contained within Shion is a Fire Master core, which allows Alphen to wield a big ol' fire sword that can really kick some ass. He's the only one who can wield this sword, and part of the reason why is because he can't feel pain. This forces our two protagonists to work together, as they can only achieve their own goals by working together. Something I've noticed is that each of their abilities impact their personalities, also in contrasting ways. Because Alphen can't feel pain, at least in the beginning, he has no problem sacrificing himself for others, and this freedom extends to his control over his emotions. On quite a few occasions, Alphen becomes incredibly angry at the Renans, such as when they invade his old slave camp. And I have to be honest, I love this. A lot of RPG protagonists don't show the most emotion, much less completely unbridled rage. But you would expect someone to be angry when you see your friends under attack. However, contrast that to Shion. Because her thorns are activated by strong emotion, she constantly has to maintain an even posture. All of her acts of charity are presented as self-interested because she doesn't want to get close to anyone. Even emotionally charged moments, Shion looks at them from a rationalistic perspective. One could say that she's selfish, but it seems clear to me that this is a defense mechanism to keep her from feeling attachment to anyone or anything too deeply, because she'd hurt them if she did. The end result is that both of our characters can represent different sides of the emotional rational spectrum, and that plays out in really interesting character interactions, especially since both of them recognize the need to have the other. Our next pairing is Dohalim and Kisara. Dohalim is a former Renan lord who had worked to promote Danan-Renan coexistence in his realm, a drastic change from the status quo. Dohalim is tortured by actions in his own past, though, and it's clear that while he advocated for Danan acceptance, he's still unused to regular society. Kisara, on the other hand, is a down-to-earth, dependable woman who you can trust to stand by your side in a fight, as well as provide a solution for all of life's ills. Also, badass. But Kisara is the rare example of a mature woman character who doesn't fall into tropes, sexualized or otherwise. She's easily my favorite character, and I love the way that her character arc develops along with that of Dohalim's. Kisara starts off being Dohalim's ardent supporter and subordinate before striking it out on her own and reclaiming her independence over and against Dohalim. By the end of the game, though, their relationship turns into a mutual partnership where both can work together towards Danan and Renan harmony. It is really well done. And finally, we come to Rinwell and Law. Law is the son of a freedom fighter who had turned into an agent for the Renans before finally joining our party, devoured by grief and guilt over what he had done. Rinwell is one of those rare Danans that can use astral arts, a trait normally reserved only for Renans. Their relationship begins more antagonistic to each other, but over the course of the game, they strike up a friendship, hovering somewhere between being inseparable as brother and sister, or potentially developing into romance further down the road. The game is ambiguous and allows the player to make up their own mind. While I like the dynamic of their relationship, and some of the funniest skits in the game have to do with Law and Rinwell, I did find these to be the weakest characters on their own. They also have some of the weakest moments in the game. For example, when Rinwell tries to kill a Renan lord, one of our main goals in the story, and Law stops her because she has hate in her heart, justifiable hate too, and then turns around and helps the party kill the lord anyway, the moment comes across as contrived and forced. Finally, I want to comment on the skit system. Skits are a mainstay in Tales games because they offer the player what few JRPGs actually do: banter and character building between members of the party. I love the system in general because of that. It allows the player to feel like not only have they gotten to know the party members, but party members have gotten to know each other. This game is no exception, although there are a few controversial changes. The first is, instead of the traditional anime style, skits in Tales of Arise are told through comic book panels that contain the normal 3D models. Critics have panned the system as lazy, but it's really no more work-intensive than drawing a few anime portraits of each character. Personally, I could take or leave this new system of presentation. I think I ultimately prefer the old anime style, but this isn't offensive to me. It's fine. Second is the simple amount of skits available after each major event, and this is something that has been happening in Tales games for a while now, Tales of Berseria especially. Sometimes it can feel like skits are simply summarizing what just happened, which is a little redundant. But more often, I feel like this was more the characters processing what had just happened, which can offer some interesting reactions. What I did notice, at least at first, was that almost none of the skits were funny. While most Tales games have a good balance between funny skits and serious skits. What I found later is that there are funny skits, hilarious skits even, but they are later in the game and they're usually hidden behind side content. Now, let's talk about the plot, or more specifically, how the plot cannot seem to find a thematic focus it wants to stick with. The game starts very simply. The goal is to kill the 5 Renan lords in order to free Shion of her thorns. Why is it good to kill the Renan lords? Because they're enslaving the people of Dana. At first you think it's a literal slavery, since that's what you see in Calaglia, but once you get to Cislodia, you see that slavery can mean other things. In Cislodia, neighbors turn informant on each other, and the people are ruled by fear of what might happen to them if they step out of line, rather than simply by brute force. It is far more reminiscent of something like the USSR, I saw this and I said, great! This game is going to examine different ways states establish their dominance over their own people. Then the game changes this by taking us to Vicente, where Danans are equal with Renans. Slightly different, but hey, we can explore how equality can breed love for a regime, may even increase productivity. That's an interesting idea. Let's look into it. But no, the game doesn't explore that theme. Instead, it pivots to a hatred of everyone is bad theme. Somehow the game no longer cares about systems of domination and instead wants to explore how hatred of Renans by Danans, who had been enslaved by the Renans, is a bad thing. Granted, unchecked hatred is a terrible thing, and I can even see how the Danans suffering the consequences for it in the Fourth Realm is a good indicator of that, but why is it that every time Alphen commits violence out of anger, it's righteous, but when someone else does it, it's hatred and evil? And I'm not knocking Alphen's anger, for the record. I find it refreshing, but it is frustrating that the game won't allow other characters to be angry, and instead sometimes even pivot into treating Alphen's anger as a bad thing that he has to overcome. By the Fifth Realm, the plot has changed completely. Yes, there's the element of hatred is evil that doesn't go away even at the end of the game, but the plot does shift to more of a focus about the real story behind it all, and in the process abandons any potential for thematic depth that it had established beforehand. The developers wanted to tell a far-reaching cosmic story, and they wanted to tell a story that explores deep moral themes, but I think that by not more tightly integrating their two focuses into one continuous focus, they failed to do either story well. And what's more sad to me is that the Tales of series has done this well before in Tales of Symphonia. It's certainly possible to do this well, but in this game, they did not. I don't want to say much about the game's ending. This game is relatively new. I don't want to spoil things. But that being said, the more I find myself thinking about the ending, the angrier I get. The developers opt for a Deus Ex Machina ending that lets everyone have a happy ending despite the truly stupid decisions some main characters make, and it just feels forced. I understand that not everyone agrees, especially right now when the game is shiny and new, but I do think in time the consensus will become that this ending was simply not that good of an ending, and that this game's plot was not that good of a plot. The characters are great, but the story the developers used the characters to tell is not. Now, I focused so much on the story and characters because that's the heart of any Tales game, but of course, there's an entire game built around these elements that we need to talk about. Let's start with the combat. Combat is in real time, and you can control any character in your party, although I only controlled Alphen the whole game. You are given the ability to do 3 ground combos and or 3 air combos, as well as various combat arts that you can weave in and out of your attacks. Rack up enough combo points, and you can activate a combo attack with one of your party members to immediately kill whichever enemy you're fighting. The upshot is that characters feel good to control and play. You can rack up huge amounts of combos, and it feels good to fight. The downshot, if that's even a word, is that enemies can be damage sponges, particularly in the later part of the game. Depending on your level, hitting them can feel like hitting them with a pool noodle because of how little impact you do to their health on a swing-by-swing basis, although this is often mitigated by the ability to deliver an instant kill attack. But of course, the option to do an instant kill attack does not exist when you're fighting bosses. Bosses, for the most part, are very difficult, although not impossible. Most bosses telegraph their attacks well, which means that you can move yourself out of the way, even if your AI teammates will often just decide to tank the hit, even if it means they'll die. I'm looking right at you, Rinwell. However, often, not always, the wet noodle problem will happen, which means that boss fights take forever. Bosses will often become a test to see if you've stocked up on enough life bottles and orange gels for you to get to the end. I realized later in the game that there's a very simple reason for this problem. The game often gives you bosses 4 to 6 levels higher than you currently are, that the game sets you up to be, which makes a big difference. Fighting a boss when you're the same level as that boss feels really good and really balanced, but the story artificially increases the challenge by upping the level of bosses compared to the enemies you had been fighting and the level that you're likely to be when you get there. The reason why this is a big problem, besides than this just taking a long time, is that beating bosses becomes a matter of having enough items, and the economy is a mess in this game. Enemies do not drop gold. Instead, they only drop materials. You can sell materials, of course, but especially early on, you can't sell them for very much. Plus, you need these materials in order to forge new weapons, which also cost money, by the way. Hence, the main way that you get money is by finishing quests or finding money in chests. This would be fine if prices for healing items were designed for the amount of money that you get early on, but they are not. Orange gels are 3,000 gold, and they are the most important items you can buy because they restore CP, which is how you heal. Thus, the economy of the game is a constant state of catch-up, where you finally save up enough money to stock up on items, simply to then use all of these items in the next boss fight. This is a pattern that continues throughout most of the game and is exacerbated by the fact that you can purchase DLC that reduces the prices of all of the items. This is quite frankly inexcusable because the DLC makes the economy balanced. You shouldn't have to pay extra for a game to be balanced. I will say though, I did not buy the DLC, and I still managed to get through the game with only 2 real grinding sessions, so it's definitely possible to get through the game without it. You'll just feel slightly uncomfortable the entire time. Dungeons are very linear. They are essentially straight lines filled with enemies and a few side rooms that will contain items. You know that if a room doesn't go anywhere else, you should go in there because there will be treasure. For the most part, I found the dungeons to be fine. They're aesthetically pleasing, and they're not too taxing on the brain to go through. The final dungeon is a bit of a huge slog, but that's the only dungeon I really felt that way about. So yeah, they're fine, but not too much to comment upon except for one thing. There are obstacles that you can use your character's special abilities to get past in order to find better items. And you'll want to do these because often the treasure you find is the best you can get in the dungeon. The problem is that you need to spend CP to get past the obstacles, which is the same resource your characters use to cast healing spells. In a world where CP is a precious resource, because orange gels are expensive as hell, you might have to fast travel back to a camp outside of the dungeon in order to heal back up. It's a bit awkward, but to be honest, I see this more as a nitpick than a substantive complaint. Characters grow in 2 ways. The first is by level, which will moderately increase your stats, but appear to be more important than you think, because your level, compared to the level of your opponent, seems to matter, although I have not scientifically measured that. The second is by investing SP into different skills. Throughout the game, you acquire different titles, which give you 1 free base ability and 4 abilities you can buy. When you finish a whole title, you also get an extra boost to a given stat. It's an interesting system, giving the player choice in how a character develops, but not too much that they can break their character. SP is earned via 2 ways: defeating enemies, which give a small amount, and by completing side quests. Side quests in this game are a mixed bag. Now, the quests themselves are actually quite good, both in content and rewards. The quests are varied in what they ask you to do, sometimes to kill a certain amount of enemies, or to kill a big enemy, or to find a certain kind of item, or to talk to certain NPCs. Often, they will tell interesting stories, fleshing out the process of Danon's self-rule in a way that I really liked. Some of them also provide important codas to our characters' personal stories in ways that feel really satisfying. The best thing that comes from these side quests, though, is the amount of SP you get from them. Compared to killing enemies, the SP gain from side quests is huge, and grinding out side quests is definitely the best way to get new skills. That being said, side quests do not grant you EXP. If you want to grind levels, and near the end, you'll want to grind levels, you need to kill enemies instead of doing side quests. All of that sounds positive, and it is, but there is one inherent flaw in the side quest system that is a huge deal. There is no indication of what level the quest requires. You could pick up a side quest and be the perfect level for it, or you could pick up a side quest and you'll find that you needed to be 20 levels higher. There is simply no way to know until you actually try to do it. And the worst part is that the developers make a lot of side quests available for you at levels where they are impossible. You are literally trained not to do side quests when you're doing the main story because you are unable to do a lot of them. I only found out about a lot of these great side quests because near the end, I decided to go back and do side quests as a way to grind, which, as I mentioned, side quests don't actually let you do, but I found that out after doing them. Even then, there were a few side quests that I was still unable to do because they want like level 60 plus, which the end of the game doesn't ask you for. But for the most part, I could enjoy my time with the side quests. This is a feature that could be easily patched in, and doing so would fix a lot of problems with the pacing of the game.
So overall, Tales of Arise is kind of hard for me to evaluate. Moment to moment, I really enjoyed the game. There were countless times I would sit there and I would just tell myself, man, I really loved this game. I fell in love with the characters. The aesthetic is amazing. The combat system is really fun to play. But when I take a step back and I critically examine key moments of the plot, the way that the different systems work together, the economy in general, the game is not the best Tales game. That is for sure. I think Symphonia is better. I think Vesperia is better. I think Berseria is better. To me, this is a middle-of-the-road Tales game. And it's not a game I think I can recommend to people just getting into JRPGs. If you like JRPGs, I think you'll find a lot of value here. But if I'm trying to like wow somebody with how JRPGs can be, I'm not going to tell them to go play Tales of Arise. I think that a lot of people are really hyped about this game right now because it just came out, it's shiny and new, but I think that the consensus of what this game will be is going to end up falling into a mid-tier range when all is said and done. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Please leave a comment down below if you agree with me, disagree with me. I know that my opinion on this is a little bit of a downer. So maybe you want to disagree with me. Or if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. If you disliked it, give it a dislike. If you want to see me review more games and talk about more stuff, please go ahead, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And I will see you next week for more Gaming Through the Ages content. Have a great day, everyone.